It all begins in the mind. Before the hand moves, before the word is spoken, before the path is chosen, there is a thought, a silent idea that sets everything else into motion. This isn't just a poetic metaphor. It's a psychological truth. Our thoughts are not idle. They are active forces shaping perception, influencing behavior, building the scamphering of our reality one silent whisper at a time. Think about it. Nothing you've done in your life has ever happened without a preceding mental event. The decisions you've made, the risks you've taken or avoided, the relationships you've built or broken, they all began with a thought. Sometimes fleeting, sometimes repetitive and obsessive, but always foundational. This is the unseen architecture of human experience. In cognitive psychology, this relationship is well documented. The cognitive behavioral model teaches us that thoughts influence feelings, which in turn influence actions. You think you're incapable. You feel small. You shrink from opportunity. Over time, the pattern becomes invisible. You no longer even see it as a pattern. It becomes just who you are. But that identity, that sense of self, it began as a thought, and it was optional. Philosophers have long echoed this sentiment. The Stoics taught that our mind is the only realm we truly control, and within it lies the power to transform even adversity into strength. They understood what modern neuroscience is only beginning to measuring, that thought is formative, not just passive reflections of who we are, but active ingredients in who we become. When we entertain certain thoughts repeatedly, especially those charged with emotion, we carve neural pathways. The brain, ever efficient, adapts. It begins to default to those patterns like a river gradually deepening its course. This is neuroplasticity in action, and it can either be our greatest ally or our most subtle enemy. The mind will adapt to what we feed it. Feed it fear, doubt, and self-limitation. It becomes very good at seeing threats. But feed it clarity, vision, and purpose, and it will sharpen its lens toward opportunity and growth. We often underestimate the influence of internal dialogue, the private commentary running under the surface of daily life. I always mess this up. They're better than me. This will never work. These phrases may seem harmless, but they are the seeds of identity. Water them often enough, and they grow into beliefs. And beliefs are sticky. They dictate behavior, reinforce habits, and define what you believe you deserve. That's why this is just about thinking positively. That can feel forced, superficial. It's about thinking you intentionally. It's about recognizing that your thoughts are choices, not facts. And that each time you choose a thought, you choose a direction, even if only slightly. But small directions, taken consistently, determine destination. We become what we think, not because thought alone creates reality, but because thought is the first builder. The silent architect behind every word, every choice, every transformation. So the next time you catch yourself in a loop of thought, ask yourself, is this the version me I want to build? Because what you allow to live in your mind eventually becomes what lives in your life. What you believe about yourself quietly governs every aspect of your life, not always loudly, not always consciously, but with unyielding persistence. Beliefs are the silent governors of behavior. They don't just influence how you act. They shape what you think is even possible for you to act upon. And that's what makes them so powerful and so dangerous when left unchecked. At some point, each of us absorbs ideas about who we are, what we're good at, what we're not, what we're worthy of, what we're destined for. These beliefs are often inherited, not chosen. Formed in childhood, forged through experience, subtly delivered by parents, teachers, peers, media, but rarely examined. And once internalized, they stop feeling like beliefs. They start feeling like truth. Imagine someone who believes they are inherently unworthy of love. That belief, often buried beneath layers of performance and perfectionism, will filter every interaction. They may pull away from intimacy, sabotage connections, misread intentions, and when relationships falter, as they inevitably will, that belief becomes reinforced. See, I knew it. It becomes a self-validating prophecy, not because it was ever true, but because it was believed. This is not just anecdotal. In psychology, the concept of core beliefs refers to the fundamental assumptions people hold about themselves, the world, and the future. These beliefs operate like lenses. Two people can encounter the same situation but interpret it entirely differently based on what they believe. Where one sees challenge, the other sees failure. Where one sees feedback, the other sees rejection. The difference isn't the event, it's the lens. Philosophically, this echoes ancient truths. The idea that our perception constructs our reality is not new. The existentialists knew it. The sages of the East lived it. They understood that identity is not fixed, that the self is not a static object to be discovered, but a dynamic process to be shaped. And the shaping happens in thought, specifically in what we believe to be true about ourselves. This is both liberating and confronting. It means we are not at the mercy of the identity we've inherited, but it also means we're responsible for the one we construct. To change your life, you must interrogate the beliefs running it, not just the obvious ones, but the quiet, invisible whisper, "You're not ready. You'll never make it. People like you don't get to win." Left unchallenged, those beliefs define your ceiling. But when you become aware of them, when you stop confusing belief with fact, you create space. Space to rewrite, to reframe, to rebuild. You begin to understand that belief is a decision, not a diagnosis, and you can decide differently. That shift, subtle but profound, is where transformation begins. Because once you believe differently about who you are, everything else starts to bend in alignment. Your goals, your standards, your behavior. The world doesn't change, but the way you move through it does, and in that movement, new outcomes are born. So ask yourself, who taught you what to believe about yourself? And have you ever questioned whether they were right? Because what you believe about who you are is exactly who you will become. Change, for most people, feels like a myth, a distant hope rather than a practical possibility. We've been conditioned to believe that who we are is largely fixed, that our intelligence, our habits, our tendencies are written in some permanent ink. But neuroscience tells a different story. The brain, far from being rigid, is fluid, dynamic, and astonishingly adaptable. This is the concept of neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself in response to experience, intention, and repetition. What this means is revolutionary. The patterns of thought and behavior that define your current reality are not permanent. They're habitual, they're reinforced circuits, and with focused attention, they can be altered. This is not self-help optimism, it's biology. The more you think a certain thought, the stronger the neural connection becomes. The more you practice a certain behavior, the more fluent your brain becomes in performing it. Neurons that fire together, wire together. That's the essence of change. Not willpower in the moment, but the deliberate redirection of mental energy over time. But here's where most people falter. They wait for change to feel easy before they commit to it. They expect motivation to arrive before movement begins. And when it doesn't, they interpret discomfort as failure. But discomfort is not failure. It's evidence that your brain is adapting, stretching, unlearning old roots and testing new ones. It's not unlike learning a new language. Awkward at first, slow and uncertain. But with repetition, fluency grows. Philosophically, this aligns with a deeper truth. We are not simply inheritators of fate. We are active participants in the crafting of character. The ancient Greeks called it apraxis. The idea that through repeated action, we sculpt virtue, we shape identity, not through what we say we believe, but through what we practice, day after day. This mirrors the neurological truth that change is not a lightning strike, but a layering. Repeated effort, slowly but surely, reshaping the terrain of the self. So, if you told yourself, "I've always been this way," pause and interrogate that statement. Have you truly always been that way, or has that way simply become familiar? Comfort, hudal, is not the same as truth. Familiar doesn't mean fixed. This is the invitation neuroplasticity offers us to reclaim your role as an architect of your inner world, to recognize that the way you think, the way you feel, the way you react, None of it is immune to change, but the brain doesn't change by wishing. It changes by doing, by repetition, by deliberate engagement with new patterns, and the longer you sustain that effort, the more natural the new becomes. And yes, it requires effort, but so does staying the same. Living in the loops of outdated beliefs and reactive habits, those carry their own weight. So if you're going to invest energy either way, why not direct it toward evolution? You are not a static being, you are a system in motion. So start moving in the direction of who you want to become. Because every thought you repeat, every habit you choose, those are not just behaviors, they are blueprints. They are bricks in the structure of your becoming. Every thought you think is like a quiet vote for the kind of life you'll end up living, not because thoughts are magic, but because they are recursive. What you repeatedly tell yourself becomes the lens through which you interpret the world, and eventually, that interpretation shapes your decisions. And your decisions, over time, define your outcomes. This is how thoughts become self-fulfilling prophecies, not through mystical force, but through behavioral gravity. Take someone who constantly thinks, I'm unlucked. That belief doesn't exist in isolation. It influences how they show up to opportunities. Cautious, skeptical, detached. They hesitate where others might lean in. They prepare for failure rather than for success. And if the result isn't favorable, the mind says, see, proof. The thought that began the cycle is now reinforced by the outcome it quietly shaped. And the loop continues. The danger isn't that the thought was true. The danger is that the thought was believed. Our brains are constantly searching for coherence. We want our outer world to match our inner narrative. So when we have belief, especially one charged with emotion, we subconsciously look for ways to confirm it. Psychologists call this confirmation bias. But it's more than a bias. It's a filter that can trap us in patterns we don't even realize we're choosing. This is why intentional thinking matters. Because if you don't choose your thoughts, they will be chosen for you. By your past, by your fears, by the voices you've internalized that were never truly yours. And those unexamined thoughts will quietly write your story while you watch, mistaking the script for fate. But it doesn't have to be that way. You can intervene. You can become the observer of your inner dialogue and ask the hard question, is this thought leading me somewhere I want to go? Not, is it comfortable? Or is it familiar? But is it useful? Is it generative? Does it reflect the version of me I'm trying to grow into? Because this is the paradox, even a lie, when believed deeply enough, can shape your reality. So the integrity of your thoughts isn't a matter of accuracy, it's a matter of alignment. Do your thoughts align with your potential, or do they shrink it? Philosophically, this calls back to ancient concept of logos, the idea that thought, word, and reality are interwoven, that how you name the world internally is how you will experience it externally. This is not metaphysical mysticism, it's pragmatic psychology. Your internal narrative is the compass for your attention, your emotion, your behavior. If it's pointing in the wrong direction, no amount of external change will reroute you until the internal map is redrawn. So pay attention to the thoughts that come dressed as facts. Question the ones that always end in limitation. Rewrite the ones that make you smaller, because once a thought is repeated, it becomes belief. And once belief takes root, it begins to shape identity. And identity will always seek expression in behavior. So the next time a thought arises, don't just ask, is this true? Ask, is this becoming you? Because the future isn't something that happens to you. It's something you are constantly narrating into existence, one thought at a time. If thought is the seed, then mindset is the climate in which it grows. And just like a plant bends toward the light, your behavior will always bend toward your mindset, toward the assumptions you hold about your capacity, your resilience, your value. This isn't abstract. It's the psychology of self-perception in motion. Mindset is more than a buzzword. It's the underlying set of beliefs that govern how you respond to challenge, how you interpret failure, how you approach growth. And most importantly, it determines what you give yourself permission to pursue. You can have all the talent in the world, all the resources, all the opportunities. But if your mindset is fixed, you will find ways to retreat from your potential. A fixed mindset operates under the belief that your abilities are static, that success is proof of inherent worth and failure is an indictment. People with this mindset avoid challenge, fear effort, and see setbacks as evidence that they're not good enough. But this view of the self, as something pre-written and final, is not only untrue, it's deeply limiting. Contrast that with a growth mindset which sees ability as something expandable. A person with a growth mindset views challenge as an opportunity to stretch. They treat failure as feedback, not as identity, and they understand that effort isn't a weakness. It's the engine of transformation. This shift may sound subtle, but it creates radically different behaviors over time. One mindset leads to defensiveness and avoidance. The other leads to curiosity, resilience, and sustained progress. Behavioral psychology supports this. What you expect from yourself heavily influences what actions you're willing to take. If you believe you're someone who learns from difficulty, you'll lean in. If you believe failure defines you, you'll withdraw. These expectations are often so deeply ingrained, we act them out without ever realizing they're optional. And that's the point. Your mindset isn't truth. It's a framework. It's a story you've been telling yourself about how the world works and what your role in it can be. And stories can be revised. Not easily, not instantly, but consistently. The philosopher William James once said, "A great many people think they are thinking when they are merely rearranging their prejudices." And this applies to mindset. You may believe you're being rational, logical, realistic, but often what you're really doing is recycling an old narrative that no longer serves you, one handed to you by your environment, your upbringing, your experiences, but not chosen, not consciously. And here's what's most empowering: the moment you become aware of your mindset is the moment you become capable of changing it. You don't need to be perfect to grow. You need to be engaged, open, willing to get it wrong so you can eventually get it right. That's what a dynamic mind looks like. That's where behavioral change begins. Not in a sudden epiphany, but in the slow, steady choice to think differently and therefore act differently. So examine your patterns, audit your assumptions. Ask yourself not just what you believe, but where that belief is leading you. Because mindset isn't just how you think. It's how you move through the world, and that movement becomes your life. Every transformation starts in thought, but it doesn't end there. Thought alone is not enough. It must be lived, tested, expressed. Otherwise, it remains theory. This is where so many people stall. They consume ideas, chase insight, even feel inspired, but never translate that inner motion into external change. It's like standing at the edge of a map and mistaking that map for the journey itself. But a map, no matter how detailed, means nothing until your feet touch the road. The mind shapes behavior, but it's behavior that cements the mind's evolution. Without action, even the most empowering thoughts can wither, not because they weren't true, but because they were never embodied. Change, ultimately, demands risk. It demands that you step outside the comfort of contemplation and into the friction of doing. And that friction, that's where growth lies. Not in the safety of perfect plans, but in the imperfect execution of them. This is something that both psychology and philosophy emphasize in their own ways. From a behavioral standpoint, repetition is essential. You can't tune your neural wiring without engaging in the very habits you're trying to build. Your brain learns through doing, through feedback, through motion. Action reinforces identity. Every time you choose courage over fear, presence over distraction, discipline over avoidance, you reinforce a different version of yourself. And slowly, that version becomes real, not in theory, in experience. Philosophically, the existentialists pointed to something similar. They argued that we don't become ourselves by thinking about who we are. We become ourselves by choosing, through acts, through decisions, through responsibility. Thought may give us direction, but choice gives us definition. And that definition evolves only through engagement with the world. What you avoid, you remain ignorant of. What you confront, you begin to master. This is why procrastination is so corrosive, not just to productivity, but to identity. Every time you delay what you know you need to do, you're not just postponing a task. You're reinforcing a believing that your goals aren't urgent, that your growth can wait, that your word to yourself isn't binding. Over time, these micro-betrayals accumulate. They erode confidence, not because you're incapable, but because you've trained yourself to hesitate, to overthink, to intellectualize instead of act. But the beauty of this principle is that the inverse is also true. Each small action, taken in alignment with your higher vision, even when it's inconvenient or imperfect, builds trust. And that trust becomes momentum, and that momentum becomes character. You don't need to feel fully ready. You need to begin. You need to move. Because clarity comes from engagement, not contemplation. So if you've spent time cultivating thought, if you've challenged beliefs, reshaped your mindset, envisioned who you want to become, there's only one thing left to do: move toward it. Even if it's messy, even if it's small. Your life is not waiting for you to think more clearly. It's waiting for you to do something with what you already know. Because action without action is imagination, and imagination unexpressed slowly becomes regret.